Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through the major news and topics facing importers and manufacturers in China and Asia today.
Hi everyone, welcome back again to China Manufacturing Decoded, episode 101 now into the three figures. I'm joined by our CEO Renaud. Renaud, hi.
Hey Adrian, and hi everybody.
So Renaud, today we're doing a how-to. So how to set up a receiving inspection, or if you like, an incoming quality inspection, two ways of saying it. So we're going to get to grips with this type of inspection and first of all go through what it is and then, you know, what it's made up of and how to set it up and why this, of course, is beneficial. So an interesting how-to today. Before we launch into that topic, though, you're looking from afar at what's going on in China. And of course, China, a big element of many people's supply chains. It's still a bit of a mess with lockdowns and things like this due to COVID, right?
Yes. So the situation is slowly evolving. It is much less of a problem in Guangdong, for example. Now, of course, the situation is different city to city, district by district, and even industrial park to industrial park sometimes. So I'm just talking about, overall, right? Overall, the situation is much better in South China. There are some places a little bit up north in Shandong and of course in Jilin where it's there are still pretty substantial restrictions. There's some areas in Jiangsu where people are basically locked down, and they can't they cannot even get out of their apartment compounds. And it's been like that for weeks and weeks in Suzhou, for example. And there are some very, very severe restrictions to travel. And of course, what everybody's looking at is Shanghai, where it started kind of as a benign, there's a little bit of COVID here, and they didn't take much action. They didn't really dare to curb the outbreak. And even a few weeks into it, they were still not really taking the measures that Beijing really wanted them to take. And so now the vice premier of China went to Shanghai, and they sent a lot of military personnel and so on and so forth, in part to help, but also it seems to enforce discipline and to say this is the policy that you have to enforce, and it's got to be strict. It's got to be extremely strict. So it's quite a mess there. Nobody really knows how many cases they really have, but even officially in the news, it's thousands and thousands every day. So when you read that, it's a big problem, and it's going to be very, very hard for them to put that back in the pot, or in the box. It's Omicron. It's extremely contagious, and the Chinese vaccines don't do much to prevent infections. So, I'm sure that the strict lockdown in Shanghai is going to last for several weeks more, and possibly several months. Who knows? Now it's really, wow, everybody's watching what's going on. And of course, it does impact manufacturing a little bit because there is some manufacturing in Shanghai, but it's not enormous. It is impacting shipments.
How about the port?
Yes. Hey, the Shanghai port is enormous. It's one of the top ports in volume shipped in the world. So still working, but there's obviously there's not enough truckers bringing the containers and everything. So let's say the logistics, that wood machine is not working as everybody would hope that it would work. Still mostly working from what I read here and there, right? With number of disturbances. And of course, a lot of companies have, let's say, a buying office, maybe some local staff in Shanghai, and they can no longer go to the different factories. I mean, if they're in Shanghai, they're going to be and they're going to stay in Shanghai for quite some time now. There's no going around, right? So any staff that's there basically cannot move now, which is it's a bit of an issue, impacting some companies much more than others, obviously. So that's the situation, and really, as I said, it's not going to get better very fast. There's no way.
Okay. So all of the areas that you've mentioned, those are ones to keep an eye on, especially if you're thinking, well, hang on, I've got a supplier in Shanghai or Jilin or wherever. So definitely worth keeping an eye on it. Guangdong though, much improved, and that's a big plus, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. So let's get back to the topic, which is receiving inspections. Okay, so what is this kind of inspection, please?
Well, so we're talking about product inspection or component inspection, right? And a manufacturing facility doesn't, make products out of thin air. They have to receive components and materials and accessories and whatnot. And then they have to transform them into the product that they are then shipping to their own customers, right? That's the way along the supply chain. So maybe I'm going to take a few examples.
Okay.
A factory that makes, that assembles electronic products, let's say consumer electronics, they're going to buy maybe displays and buttons and batteries and so on and so forth from different suppliers of theirs. They might do PCB assembly in-house if they have the assembly machines and so on, or they might buy the PCBA parts, components, from outside, and the wires, and I mean, it's a long list, right? The materials to do the soldering, I mean, the whole thing. They might do plastic injection molding, or they might buy the plastic parts from outside, and same thing for the silicone parts, etc. And the packaging, obviously, from the unit packing, the nice little color box, all the way to the cotton boxes that are used as master cartons. So here, you're talking about a lot of different components to purchase. And, some electronic products have a relatively simple bill of material, simple BOM, between, let's say, 10 and 30 lines, meaning 10 to 30 different types of components and accessories. And some others are, 100 or 1,000 lines. And that's a lot of different things to receive and put together, right? And now to have a complete product that works and that looks good, that works well, and that works, as long as planned, as a good quality product, but also reliable product, you got to make sure all the components are good. They are as per the product design, as per the intentions of the designer, and consistently every batch. If you have, you have some issues maybe in the PCB assembly, maybe the solder paste dried a bit, and then after a while, with a little bit of vibration, the parts, the soldering breaks, and then the whole product stops working. This is terrible. Or maybe the plastic parts, they have some very serious flow lines, and it's very ugly, like right at the top of the product, and people just don't like it, and it makes the whole aesthetics of the product pretty unappealing. And there's all kinds of issues, the display, whatever, maybe it's a LCD display, and you can see maybe things like dead pixels and things like that. And from time to time, the whole display just stops working. And sometimes it works, but maybe it's not the exact component that is desired, and that's actually relatively common with electronics. You have maybe the memory chip, is supposed to be 64 gigabytes, and it's only 16 gigabytes. Well, someone decided to cheat a little bit and make a little bit of extra margin, right? But if nobody catches it, then it goes into the final product, and in the final product, it might, be relatively minor and just, okay, there's a little bit of, the saving capacity and the external module there is not as high as needed, but actually it's not really needed. So whatever, nobody's really going to pick up on it, hopefully. Versus, oh, wow, it makes the whole product completely buggy and it freezes and just doesn't work at all, And the people who try to save 10 cents on per piece are actually causing maybe products that retail for $150 or $400 in the West. Maybe they make these wool products be useless and completely fail, right? So the temptation can be high to cheat, or maybe the risk that some of the component suppliers mess up and do a bad job is relatively high, and it does have some very severe consequences. If you don't keep an eye on what you're buying, then you're going to be in trouble one day or another. And I took an example with electronic assembly, but I could take, maybe garments. You have a factory making pants, and they buy the fabric and the yarn and the accessories and so on, and the packaging materials, the buttons and so on. And, maybe the zippers break easily, or maybe the zippers are very hard to open and close. Who knows why, right? Maybe the fabric itself was not in a dyeing house. It was not finished the right way. So maybe it's not exactly the right color, or maybe it bleeds. There's a color transfer when it's in contact with something else, or maybe onto the skin. There's all kinds of issues that can happen that come actually from the materials and components. And when you look at what people call bad products from China, and people look at the suppliers, these Chinese manufacturers that export these products, they really do a bad job. Well, yes and no. If you could make sure that they get exactly the right materials and components as planned, without any, inconsistency in quality and so on, a lot of these bad quality product issues would just disappear. And same thing for, bad products, they don't work. Well, maybe they just haven't been designed properly. And so who's at fault here? The foreign buyer who sees a sample and say, oh, this is nice, works nice, I want to buy it, put my logo on it, without doing any basic reliability test and without doing any of the design job. Well, they're taking a big risk. I'm not sure I would put all the blame on the supplier. So, it's one of the things, it's one of the main reasons for poor quality. So a receiving quality inspection is simply the process of checking these materials and components as they arrive to the factory, before they get embedded into final products, finished products, or before they get transformed on their way to a finished product. Because if you catch issues right there and you send it back to the supplier, there might be a little bit of a delay, but hopefully they can send you the good stuff quickly, and then you can make good quality production, right? That's the whole point, and maybe you're going to do a receiving inspection and you're going to say, we don't have time to send it back to them. It's it looks like it's 20% of the products of the part, a certain part that are not good. So let's sort them out first. We can already start production with the 80% that are okay. And the 20%, either we ask the supplier to come and fix them, or we try to fix them ourselves. There's a lot of that happens. And maybe deduct the cost of that fixing, of that rework, deducted from the next payment to that supplier. There's a lot of that. It's relatively common, right? So that's why, why we need to do a receiving inspection or incoming quality inspection. Yeah, when you see factories that don't do this properly, you pretty much know that you're going to be in trouble. You know that the quality of the products or the parts that they're going to send to you, it's not going to be great. It's all really exposed to random elements. How good are their own suppliers? Who knows?
Well, this takes me back maybe a few episodes to when we were talking about whether you're going to be a hands-on or a hands-off buyer as part of a series that we're doing on sourcing from China. And I suppose this absolutely, you could add it to the list of something that hands-on buyers really need to be on top of.
Yeah, make sure that your suppliers do a good job at that. And in some cases, as part of the due diligence, when a client asks us, hey, you really need to vet the supplier properly, put some resources on that. That's one of the things we check. Or also when one of our clients is developing a new product, it's going to be made by some factory XYZ somewhere, and they ask us, hey, how can we, really do some, get some extra assurance that they're going to do a good job? Well, where's their checklist to check all of, the critical components, at least the critical ones, right? Maybe not all the small standard parts that they bought here and there, like the wires and so on, but anything that was custom made for this product, and anything that is relatively expensive or that would definitely lead to a failure of the wool product, or to the user being unable to use the products, right? So these are the critical components. And this for the critical components, do they actually have a checklist of what they're going to check on the product, on the parts, on the components as they arrive? And of course, also, what is the checklist to check the finished product, and what is their plan to check the processes along the way, and so on. But that's one of the key steps. If they're not going to check that, well, chances are they're going to try to buy these from their buddies. And as you know, and that particularly is true in China more than in Vietnam or India, but they have this concept of face, and they have this village mentality where they try to do all the business, together with people from their hometown or from their family, even if possible. And, if your brother is sending you some parts, you're not going to check them, right? You're just going to trust him. And if you complain and send it back to him, he's going to lose face, right? So be a good customer, a good brother, just pass on the bad stuff to your own customer, but don't embarrass your supplier. It's less and less true, fortunately, but wow, 10, 20 years ago, it was more of an issue, and it's quite confusing for foreign buyers. They really cannot understand that, right?
I can imagine.
Right.
Yeah. You've already mentioned some of the points that we're going to go on to, actually. So the next part of the episode, let's go through what makes up, the whole receiving inspection sort of process. So what do we need to do? You start with, your requirements. So you already mentioned checklists. You've also mentioned to be mindful about CTQ components, critical to quality. So, that would be something like a screen on a laptop, for example.
It's more than that. Let's not confuse. Maybe for listeners, maybe we can get confused with that.
Yeah.
When we say critical components or key components, it means the most important ones. So if it's, I don't know, on a mobile phone, obviously the display, the battery, the PCBA and things like that. Anything that if it doesn't work really will lead to problems. And usually these are relatively expensive component, also maybe the casing and so on, right? And then when we look at one of them, I don't know, for example, the casing, let's say it's aluminum casing, well, you look at it and then some of the characteristics will be CTQ, will be critical to quality. These are the ones that need to be checked more thoroughly more with a higher sampling than some other characteristics that maybe will even be picked up by a simple visual inspection or that would not really derail the whole product. But there are a few characteristics where the inspector has to pay more attention, right? For example, a certain dimension value with a tolerance. Okay, you need to check that, on a number of samples because it's really very, very important.
Yeah.
Right. So that's an example. And if this is not clearly documented on the requirements for the inspectors, well, it's not going to be checked more thoroughly. Or at least it's not likely to be, and that's a problem. That's a real problem.
Right. So the issues that you've described, we're slightly ahead of the requirements, right? So we have to find a way to define our requirements quite specifically, and that would include things like tolerances on these sort of key components, right? So let's look at the requirements then. How are we going to put those together?
Well, I mean, the basic question is, imagine an incoming QC inspector. They're going to check this component and that component and that component. How are they going to know if it's okay or not? First, do they have some kind of golden sample that was approved with the supplier? Do they have it, at their fingertips? Do they have maybe a 2D mechanical drawing with the critical dimensions and the target and the tolerance and so on? Do they know what color and what finishing it's supposed to be in and what material? All of this is super important. But if they don't even know that, well, anything's possible.
Yeah, how are they going to check?
Yeah, how are they going to pick up on the fact that it is not, it does not conform to the requirements, right? So these are, start with the very basic things like that. And then if you can document a few points, okay, when you check that, well, check this, sort of give them a method. That's great. Also, if it's not the first production batch, you will have some examples of defects that they would have put aside in the previous job, or maybe that were put aside on the assembly line. Well, okay, here are the top 10 most common or most likely defects that can appear on these products, right? So basically, if the inspector doesn't know, you might be in trouble, right? And as we mentioned, let's say you need to have an understanding of risk. So you're going to want the inspectors to spend more time on the components that were custom made for that product, right, or the material or whatever, versus, they buy this button in black from stock from the supplier, and it's a large supplier, and they've been, selling their products to us for 5 years, never had a problem. Okay, so the question now really is, do we even do incoming inspection on these parts, right? Maybe we'll just open the bag, check one piece quickly, and that's fine, right? Versus, this PCBA is coming to us, is expensive with all these electronic components on it, and we're going to want to do functional testing. If there is a functional testing station and the PCBA supplier has already done the same functional testing, with the same station on 100% of the PCBAs, then maybe you're only going to do it on a small sample of the batch they sent to you. Otherwise, you might have to do it on 100%. Maybe not in incoming QC, maybe as one of the first steps in the assembly line to sort of, to sort out in case there's 1% or 5% that don't conform. So you need to make these kinds of decisions, right? And if there's a part that is very hard to control on a certain characteristic, then you might have to do 100% inspection. And for example, plating on a cast part in a certain color where small blemishes are likely to appear actually cannot really be avoided with the current process. And you know that the customer doesn't want to see many of them. Then you need to have boundary samples. This is okay, this is okay, this is not okay, this is not okay. Sort of illustrations of what is acceptable, not acceptable. And you might have to do 100% inspection on them. So somebody has to think of the risk and really adapt the sampling and the criteria of the inspection to these risks.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, okay, great. So once we've defined our requirements and also sort of pointed out the highest risk areas, and that's a good way to utilize the inspector's time efficiently to focus on those. We're going to try and put together a procedure to follow, right?
Yes. So what we see in a lot of factories is there's nothing documented. They kind of go at it, and usually there are just a few people doing incoming QC, and they are overworked, and they just try to do the work as fast as possible, not to finish too late at night, and and then you observe what they do, and it might be quite inconsistent and sort of dangerous. So basically, what is the process? It kind of looks like this. First, you need to know what is arriving. So they have to work with the warehouse stocking people and the logistics people to know what is delivered. Usually there's a delivery note or something. Then they can actually prepare and get make sure they have approved sample parts and so on, and maybe the 2D drawings, etc., etc. Usually it doesn't. It's kind of a queue often because it cannot be inspected immediately. So it goes into a specific area that is very clearly labeled, not checked yet. So it means do not by mistake put it in a warehouse or bring it to the assembly line or anything like that. No. Or to whatever machinery. Keep it there until it goes into incoming QC, right? Then there might be a little bit of a count, or maybe checking the weight of the bags or the cartons. Most of the time is going to be random checking, as I mentioned. So pick some samples at random, and then do the inspection. Or maybe, as I mentioned, on some of the parts, you might have to do 100% inspection, at least for one or two of the characteristics of the part. So you need to pick these parts. You're going to do the inspection itself. So, maybe a visual check, maybe a quick dimension check on some of them, maybe some specific tests, etc., etc. If there are defectives, put them aside, and then at the end of the inspection, count them and see if they are under the limit or not. Very often is the same system of acceptance sampling by attributes. People call it the AQL inspection system often, that is used, same as is very commonly used for finished products in Asia, and see if the batch is passed or not. If it's passed, okay, then it can go. There's often some kind of sticker or something, and then it's very clear to everybody. It can go to the next logical step, often in a warehouse, or it's put in quarantine. And then sometimes it's very structured, sometimes it's very loose, but somebody has to decide what to do with it, whether to send it back to the supplier, have the supplier send some people to work or whatever. There's some edge cases where the decision is not very, very clear, especially since there are all kinds of competing priorities. Hey, we have to start doing the fabrication right now and whatever. We guess it's not really a problem, but maybe we should ask some of the engineers who worked on the development, etc., etc. And in some cases, when it's more structured, it goes to a MRB board. Several people from different functions will gather and together decide and approve of what to do. And basically, that's the process. And of course, if nothing is reported, nothing is documented, then after that, it's kind of hard to go back and say, okay, what exactly happened? Because there are going to be cases where some issues are not detected, or maybe not detected in large proportions, and the batch goes to the next step to process A, process B, and so on. And some people are going to say, hey, there's a lot of defectives here that we need to put aside. That's really a problem, right? And then it goes back to the incoming QC because we need that feedback loop before going back to the supplier and telling them that there are issues. And sometimes, the worst case is that they make the product, they ship it to the customer, maybe halfway around the world. And then the customer says, hey, there's a problem here. You use the wrong rubber feet, or the battery just doesn't even recharge once it's discharged, or some issues like this. And everybody's like, how come we did not catch it in incoming QC? This is amazing, right? So they're going to go back to it and try to understand. So that's why it's quite important to have a little bit of records on that. And it's also part of a good traceability system anyway. As you process the batches, make some notes about that batch. It was, inspected that day in incoming QC. It was moved there, and it was processed on this machine with that, maybe this operator on that day, and then you move to the next process. Then you have a traceability for the batch, which can be quite handy to reduce the exposure to liability and to recalls and so on and so forth, and to have the ability to segregate suspicious products and maybe recall fewer of them, right? And do a proper follow-up on quality issues, let's say, especially when there's a high potential for safety implications for users, right?
Absolutely.
The last thing, as I mentioned, is very important to have this feedback loop in place. Well, what is documented in incoming QC, the suppliers have to know. What we see very often is the file and forget system, where the incoming QC people, just took and maybe they write something on a piece of paper. That's the death of it. Once it's on a piece of paper, it will go into a drawer. Nobody will do anything about it. So it's got to be a way to give that to purchasing, and then to have purchasing send that information over to the suppliers. Because even if you say, well, okay, there's 2% defectives like this, okay, some of them have, little scratches, okay, but you don't tell the supplier doesn't know. Maybe next time you have 10% with scratches, because maybe it's some little issue in there, maybe the way they transport or the parts, or maybe the way they ship the parts to you. And some of the parts maybe created scratches when banging against each other. And maybe they will say, oh, it was okay last time, no problem, let's do it, even without the internal bags or something. And then next time everything is scratched. So you need to give them the feedback. This is really, really important. And then once you have, unfortunately, you're going to have some big problems from time to time. And then, this would lead us into a whole different topic about corrective actions. It's an interesting topic, but we don't have time today.
No.
But it's quite important to to really follow up and not just do the work in the short term to make sure that this batch is going to be okay, but also make sure that they understand how to improve their process, not only on that part, but maybe their process in general for all of the parts, that they make, to prevent that issue from recurring into the future, and that they update their documentation as appropriate, etc., etc. This is a whole other topic, but you need to drive that into your supplier base if you want them to improve over time.
And it all starts with the data you're getting from the components that are initially coming in. Absolutely. Yes. Well, that's really interesting. If you're listening and you're wondering, I've still got questions about these incoming inspections, get in touch with us. There are contact details in the show notes. We'll be happy to help, of course. But I suppose this is one to add to the to-do list for everybody with supply chain in Asia.
Yes. Does your supplier actually check what their own suppliers are doing? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a brilliant way to end it. Thanks, Renaud.
All right. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.